Are you thinking about upgrading to the Fujifilm X-T5? Or maybe you're a newcomer to the Fujifilm X system and choosing between the X-T4 and X-T5? Well, you've come to the right place, because in this video I will break down the differences and similarities between these two cameras so you can make an informed decision. First of all, let's talk about what these two cameras have in common. Both the X-T4 and the X-T5 boast these physical dials on top of the camera with which you can change your shutter speed and your ISO for a tactile, old-school film camera experience. In-body image stabilization you will also find on both of these cameras, ensuring steady shots even when you're shooting handheld, with the X-T4 coming up to 6.5 stops with certain lenses and the X-T5 coming to 7 stops with the right lenses. Another thing both of these cameras have in common, which I personally find very important, is weather resistance. The worst thing as a landscape photographer, I assume also as a street photographer, that can happen to you is you're out in a scene, it's great, the conditions are great, and it starts raining, which can oftentimes actually boost your images, adds a certain flavor to them. When it starts raining, you have to put your camera away because it can't withstand the rain. So weather resistance, to me, one of the most important things in the camera. A very handy feature that the X-T4 improved upon the X-T3 and the X-T5 continues this is a switch between photo and video mode. So you don't have to change your settings all the time when you choose to shoot photo or video. You can just flip that switch and all your settings will be changed. And then of course also a great similarity between the X-T4 and 5, which the X-T4 also improved upon the X-T3, is the battery life. You have this way larger battery that the X-T3 didn't have yet, so that ensures that you don't have to take 20 batteries when you go out shooting. Most of the time for me one battery does suffice, but sometimes I just choose to take another one just in case, but I usually never really need that. Now let's dive into the differences between the X-T4 and 5. First of all, one very great change is the sensor. It's an impressive 40 megapixel sensor on the X-T5 now, in comparison to the 26 megapixel sensor on the X-T4. So that's way higher resolution for you. And then another improvement that comes with the X-T5 is the vastly improved autofocus as well as eye tracking, which is great especially if you're a street or a portrait photographer, because the autofocus on the X-T4, while it's not bad, it kind of lacks in that department. Now, if you're a videographer, the X-T5 also holds something special for you because it can shoot up to 6.2K video, 30p, while the best resolution on the X-T4 is only 4K. Now let's get to kind of a controversial part about the X-T4, and I guess for most people improvement on the X-T5 is the X-T3 back then had a 3-way articulating screen, and the X-T5 also has that one, and a lot of people didn't like it, but the X-T4 didn't have it. It had a fully articulating, like the flippy screen that you can fully flip out, so they went back to that screen. Most people, X-T5, X-T4, X-T3, I guess most people see it as a photographer's camera, not a videographer's camera, and therefore they changed it back. And lastly, the X-T5 also comes with a new processor that is twice as fast as the one on the X-T4, which overall just leads to greater and faster performance. Now let's get to the part that is quite important for most people, and it's how much you will pay for these cameras. So if you want to buy the cameras used, and that's the only way to really compare them because the X-T4 you can't buy new anymore, for the X-T5 in an excellent condition you will pay about 1,500 euros, and for the X-T4 in an excellent condition you will pay about 1,200 euros. And then you also have the option to buy the X-T4 in a good condition, not excellent, which will set you back about 1,100 euros. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any deals for the X-T5 in a only good condition, I assume because it's just newer and it just hasn't been used as much, or maybe it just wasn't there. Now, if you don't want to buy a used camera, which honestly is most of the time a great deal, but maybe you want a new camera, you can only buy the X-T5 new and it'll set you back about 1,800 euros, which is basically the same price you paid for the X-T4 when it came out. Let's talk about the use cases for both of these cameras, and I'll start with the X-T4. Personally, I enjoy the fully articulating screen, especially because I do a lot of YouTube videos and I can just flip the screen open and look at myself when I'm filming, so I know I'm not off center or out of focus. Also for street and travel photography, I think this fully articulating screen is great because you can flip it shut, and I find it very enjoyable to shoot like that because gives like an old school film camera vibe. This camera is also a great choice if you want to save some money, you're somewhat on a budget and you don't want to spend these 250 to 300 euros extra if you would buy the camera in the same condition. Maybe you can put that money towards a better lens or something like that, which in most cases is actually the better choice, I think. But also if you don't really care for cropping, because the 26 megapixels against the 40 megapixels can make quite the difference, and you don't mind that slightly slow pace photography, obviously because of the slow processing of the processor and also the slow autofocus. So reasons that speak for the X-T5 are obviously the greatly improved performance through the processor, the autofocus. So if you shoot a lot of portraits or street or maybe even sports photography, the autofocus can really help you with that, and you don't mind spending that extra money. And of course, if you frequently shoot landscape photography and you really want to crop into those images, you should probably go for the X-T5. Personally, I try to get it right on the spot all the time. I obviously also don't get it right all the time, but that's what I try and do because that's kind of what I have to do with my Fujifilm X-T4 with only 26 megapixels. I personally chose the Fujifilm X-T5, as I've mentioned a couple of times, and I'm actually not considering upgrading. I wouldn't want to pay the premium to get to the X-T5. I do obviously like the improved autofocus, the faster processing power, and also the high megapixel count, but it would actually be a drawback for me to go to the X-T5 because of that flipping screen on the X-T4. That is just too important to me, and I would need to have two cameras to be able to film myself and then also for photography, and that's just too much money to spend. So whether you're torn between the Fujifilm X-T4 and the X-T5, or you're just exploring the Fujifilm X system in general, make sure to check out my video on the Fujifilm X system and why I made the decision I did, and maybe you can find the perfect camera for your photography journey.